Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone is having a good one. Welcome back to another episode of Shift Happens. Today, we got a light docket for you all. We'll be talking about CARB truck emissions deal. That thing's up in the air. Does it have legal footing? Does it not? We'll talk about it from both of those sides there. I also have warehouse hacks to help you kind of do more with less. And lastly, we will dive into freight brokers and, how they're the middlemen that make modern shipping work. This is Darrion Weems along with
Hey guys, Tal saying, welcome back. Let's get it rolling.
Spectacular. Welcome back with us. So carb. This is we've actually had this on the docket a couple times
Yeah,
here recently. I think there's actually there was I think the Senate actually voted down the CARB rules in the April or May, saying that it was essentially kind of unconstitutional and California didn't really have the authority to go and put these very strict kind of emission standards. And so really they pretty much voted it down and it nullified their ability to kind of to ban these things, as well as like the heavy truck vehicle regulations. And then there was something else in there that had to do with what's that, residential appliances. I actually watched the press conference where he signed that when they were kind of joking about, different appliance standards. And so I thought that was funny. But I think from our perspective, particularly, operating a fleet in California, this
yeah.
it puts it up in the air, and it puts us actually in a little bit of a pickle here because we're not getting any clarity around what is actually happening and what we should really be preparing ourselves for. Are they happening? Are they not happening? You know, is the Senate going to let it happen? Is California? I know Gavin Newsom said that they were going to kind of fight it in court and try to bring them back. But I think this is going to be one of those things where, we're it up to the political whims of like where we are politically at the time. So right now, politically, we are in a anti-green tech, anti kind of regulatory environment with Trump and his administration. And a
Yeah.
lot of what we're seeing them do is just roll back a lot of these things that were meant to make to be greener, if you will. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how this stuff continues to shake out. A lot of uncertainty though for fleets like ours.
The main thing is if one would just go to one of these meetings that, there's a quarterly meeting at the port, and then there's like some of these associations like HTA, ATA, they hold like quarterly meetings, right? Usually at the same time, because a lot of times these guys from LA or Houston, they will fly into Oakland or LA whenever. Like it's like, kind of back to back set up these meetings, right? In Oakland and LA. And all the chassis providers are there, terminals are there. And I actually even asked these questions, and I try to stay there for about a couple hours every quarter. If you would just even ask these guys at the ARB, they're like, hey, on federal level, yeah, Trump is rolling back. But still, some of the rules still in California applies, right? So what does that mean? Are they going to have all drayage trucks by 2035 go all electric? They want to do it, but does that mean they'll be able to do it by 2035? Maybe by 40 or 2050. But it's just like, even if you look at the patterns, right, of the last few years, there's about two electric companies that are the charging station companies. They were supposed to have their Oakland and Livermore location, actually one right next to us in Livermore, right where we are. And they're like pushing that back from 2024 to 2025 and maybe even 2026. So what does that tell you? Even people that got funding, all the funding that they need to do what they cannot find people to take on these trucks. They can't find people to come in there and pay them because again, they know, it is they want to do the right thing, right? But hey, they might have to start looking at other option because at federal level they cut down all these funding. Is that going to change within California? And who knows in a few years if Governor Newsom or Democrats or if that switches over to Republicans, because we've already seen that last election. There was a lot of red counties that went red. you know. So it'll be interesting to see. I guess again that's why we're not shooting ourselves in the foot to buy a bunch of electric trucks because it's just like, yeah, we're no nobody's ready for it, you know.
Yeah. I think you bring up a good point there, which is like an interesting one, which is like how feasible is this stuff actually? Some stuff sounds good in a meeting or looks good on like a presentation, but then when you start talking about the infrastructure that needs to get built out, the charging stations, the subsidies that are going to have to get paid in order to make these trucks affordable enough to for fleets to buy them. And then lastly, can the trucks actually perform the work that they need to do, like a similar amount of work as a diesel truck? And I think most of that stuff is just up in the air, right?
Yeah.
And I think the place I like to look at least is, look at the consumer adoption of electric vehicles, right? Like, they started, I think Tesla came out with the Model S in like 2010 or 2011, right? And it was a very expensive car and not that many people bought it. And now we're here and it took a long time. And, it was difficult to get the charging network right and all of those things. And it took really about 15 years. Now we're sitting here in 2025 and we're here in California and now tons of people drive Teslas and love Teslas, and I had a Tesla. It got totaled out. We got into a car accident. Probably going to get another one, but um you know wasn't a feasible thing to do until the prices of them came down, and then there was enough infrastructure for you to charge these things anywhere you were going to go, to kind of make it work. I also think that the thing about funding, right? You talked about those that charging station in Livermore there. Where's the funding for this stuff going to come from, right? If it's not going to come from the federal government,
Yeah.
I don't think the state of California is operating in enough of a surplus to fund as much of this stuff as they want to. So even if they find themselves in a position where they can win a court battle and try to mandate some of this stuff, like where does the money come from to build out the charging infrastructure? Where does the money come from to operators the subsidies needed in order to make this work, right? And so I think from that perspective, there's a lot of unanswered questions around it. And there's, again, there's some people who really like it and love it and want to see it happen. And then there's some people I think that hate it. And then there's some people like us that I think are just kind of in the middle that are like, hey, when it's good enough and cheap enough and it works just the same, I can't wait actually until we can buy one of those and put those to use.
I mean, just look at AB5 law, right? All of these businesses got exemptions, except trucking, like the owner operator model, right? What does that tell you? They're just going after the big player, big dogs, like meaning the trucking industry. Now, there's just so much money to think that these trucking companies are making, which really hurt over the years to a lot of trucking companies, right? I mean, yeah, they're definitely with all the rules and regulations that they, you know, they want to apply on the trucking companies. But what about, like we talked about, truck schools, repair shops, right? And then there was if you're keeping track on these Twitter feeds, like every month somebody's cooking something up and they're going after somebody, right? Before it was like the H1B visa, and now it's the truck repairs, right? Like, hey, nobody's holding them accountable. Yeah, because nobody, a lot of kids don't want to be a truck mechanic or a diesel mechanic, right? And that's why their pay is really high, which is a good thing, right? Because
Yeah.
you got to be really what did I say? There's a lot of Russians and Ukrainian, like from Iranian, like from those countries, produce really good mechanics,
Uh-huh.
right? And it's true, and it's true. I mean, a lot of the mechanics we work with, you can tell, hey, these guys are nothing against anybody, but hey, if they're the best, they are the best. You go to the best to get your truck repaired because a lot of times what's happening is the trucks will go into the dealers and they have a lot of new mechanics, right? They get mechanics from truck school, the schools, right? And their trucks keep breaking down because they cannot do a great job as they used to be able to do. Because a lot of the good mechanics go out there and they have their own shop set up, you know. But anyways, not to sidetrack guys on the pod here, but just trying to share a little bit of feedback on the grounds here, right? But yeah, so what else do we got next here? Yeah, I think we don't want to bore our audience by just talking about the regulations, but hey, a lot of times like the boring stuff, like people don't get into because oh, it might be even if it's something. What I've seen is even if it's something the deadline is like next year or something, people are not gonna work on it until like the month of or 2 months before. Well, you don't want to do that, right? Like you want to be able to plan ahead on these car, especially if you got big fleet like us or anybody that over got 10 trucks. Hey, you should definitely be on the lookout because if you have 20 or less trucks, there's a lot of funding still available. But I did ask them, hey, what about companies over 20 trucks? They're like, yeah, there's not a lot of programs, but be on the lookout in the coming months for those programs to be rolling out. So again, if you don't want to go to these boring events, hey, so watch for our podcast. So we'll drop the news.
Yeah. And also a good reason why they should work this thing out so that there's certainty one way or the other so that people can start planning because this stuff takes a lot of planning. You want to go and make capital investments for these trucks, and if you're gonna go electric, it's gonna be 250 a pop, right? Like that stuff's gonna take planning. It's gonna take a long time of kind of putting together the capital and setting aside the capital to go and start replacing. So there's a lot that needs to happen around that. Hopefully we get a little bit of certainty kind of in the future here. Moving on here, you're talking about warehouse hacks to kind of do more with less in the warehouse. Maybe I'll let you kind of take this one here, Tal. Optimizing the layouts and technology, labor processes. You can kind of dive in wherever you want to there, talk about kind of
So
warehouse stuff.
very interesting segment here. About 50% of the warehouse space is sitting empty in the Bay Area, all the way up to even Tracy and Livermore. I was talking to a young real estate agent that dropped by last week, dropped a bunch of goodies and stuff, and he was telling me about 1.5 million out of three or something million spaces available in Tracy, and then pretty similar in Livermore, and then the Bay Area. He was like, "Yeah, don't call me on it, but about 50% of the warehouse space is sitting empty in the Bay Area, right?" So why is that? I mean, a lot of times when we talk about AI and e-commerce and stuff like that, yeah, it used to be our most majority of our customer used to be e-commerce, but again, they built so much, right, the warehouse space that this is overbuilt, right? So again, somebody's gonna solve this problem, I think, with that much warehouse space. Anyway, so warehouse hacks to maximize optimization, I would say. So look, we started off with like a 5,000 square feet of space, and we were turning around anywhere from like 15 to 20 loads a day, which was pretty crazy to think about on like a tiny warehouse. And we didn't even want to get into the warehousing business. It just like we were looking for a truck parking spot, and then a tiny warehouse came with that, with a few docks, right? And that's how we kind of got into the warehousing business. Okay, let me see. Here's a few points here. So the first thing is, again, there's a lot of moving parts in warehousing, and you can make a lot of mistakes by loading the wrong product, right? Especially if you have a small space. You got to make sure you got a good warehouse crew like ours, right? That are on top of where the freight is staged, right? Because a lot of times when you send trucks to warehouses, why is there standby time on a lot of warehouses? Why are they taking many, many hours to offload your truck or unload your truck? Is majority of the time maybe labor shortage or staging the product, right? So that's definitely over the years we struggle even with us, but again, you make errors and then you perfect them and make them better, right? The poor dispatch, have to be in good planning with your warehouse crew, right? Because if they're not on the same page and they're not on the same page with the brokers, like planning this out, because a lot of times as soon as the customer's freight hits our warehouse, they want it out. They do not care, about appointments or they're on you pretty much because that customer is calling, like, hey, we need our freight out of there, right? So yeah. Sorry, man. Alicia, you dropped me a lot of stuff here. Uh, but yeah, what do you think about the warehousing business? What has surprised you so far getting into the warehousing business?
I think for myself in the warehouse business, the key has been kind of looking at what you guys were doing already and then figuring out how to make some of those things a little bit more efficient. One thing, and we're kind of in the process of that, is like trying to nail down a good BMS system so that it is a lot easier for us to know where stuff is staged at and how to plan out into the future, what's coming, what's going, so that that stuff isn't just living in people's heads or on like a sheet of paper on somebody's desk somewhere. And then I think the thing that I think about often right now, and I don't even know if we've spoken about this yet, and never a better time than now, is like, the way that we charge for the warehouse, right? I did a ton of research a couple months back, and a lot of the like bigger players are doing pricing by the cubic foot, versus, square footage in a floor space, kind of as we're doing. They have more kind of complicated, not complicated, but, they'll have racking systems and they're charging by the cubic foot and things of that nature. And so the thing that I'm most interested in as we kind of move through this transition is just how we can do some of those things in a way that will aid us, not just in being more efficient, but then also being able to get kind of better pricing power within that, right? And so, we've got a 25,000 square foot warehouse. Um, it currently doesn't have any racking. We're in the process of, a friend of mine in Southern California has a very big warehouse and she has a bunch of extra racking that she's going to let us buy off of her for some number that we're we're working through right now. But the cool thing comes in being able to take that 25,000 square feet of space and turn it into 40, 50, 65,000 square feet of space, right? Just by having the right stuff in there and then kind of having better kind of pricing around that.
Yeah,
It's interesting. You were talking a little bit early on about, um, the amount of space that's empty in the Bay Area,
yeah,
which is, I think Tesla left, right? Which probably was taking up a fair amount of that square footage.
yeah. They used to be all over, many warehouses out there, and then they started building in Reno, out of state, and the whole deal. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of pairs well with like the thing that we were talking about earlier with the CARB stuff, right? Like, why is Tesla leaving? Because it's just getting too hard to do business in California, right? For a company of that size. And so, at some point you just kind of throw your hands up and you say, you know what? I'm gonna just put this warehouse in Reno, right across the border here, and we'll just ship that stuff into Reno, right? Dray it in, same day it gets here, and then move all, the bulk of our operation to a place like Texas where we don't have to worry about these things.
Look at another thing, right? With AI, with the future. What is the future? AI, right? And where are they building majority of these AI infrastructure companies? Target Texas, right? So yeah, the interesting thing to watch, I would say, is in the Silicon Valley. All these company startups are in Silicon Valley, San Francisco to San Jose, the whole belt right there, right? Where it'll be interesting. All that money coming into these companies, they need data centers, and Amazon is coming into the mix to build their own data center, right? So something to kind of keep track of. Like, hey, if it's Texas, I mean, we're already trying to plan out to be in that mix, right? So why would not one want to be in a mix of where everybody's going? So I definitely think it's something to watch for. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, just like you're gonna, the market always wins, right? So if it's more difficult to do things in a certain place and more expensive and just more of a headache, then naturally you're just gonna move to a place where it's easier to do these things, right? The thing with most of Silicon Valley, particularly for the last 40 years has been that Silicon Valley, for the most part, has been getting most of their revenue from online services, right? They haven't been in like the hardcore, they haven't been in the atom space, they've been in the bit space, right? So they haven't needed to worry about most of this stuff. But, a company like Tesla who's building real stuff that has to, you know, be manufactured and be moved around, they have to have a real conversation with themselves like, hey, is this kind of is this the best place for us to do this and to get that value? I think it's also interesting as we see maybe warehouses get more efficient and maybe need less space because of technology improvements and process improvements and things of that nature. Like how much of that warehouse space maybe becomes unnecessary, right? Because people are just better with less, right? So it'll be interesting to see how a lot of this stuff shakes out. I think, do you have any kind of closing statement on like what would be your number one warehouse hack? I'll go first just so you can think for a little bit. Number one warehouse hack, I think, in my limited time here, would be you gotta find a way to make the best use of the space, whether that's layout or capital investment in certain things like racking. Find a way to make the space more efficient so that you can A, get more revenue for that same space, and then B, maybe not need as much labor for that space.
All right, that's a good one. Yeah, pretty much optimizing your small warehouse into maximizing, profits, right? Because a warehouse is not turning those lights on in a warehouse is not cheap. A lot of times, that's the one question that I get is like, "Hey, you guys got a pretty big space compared to like a lot of freaking companies that do not get into the warehousing business, but do get into the brokerage business, right? Because hey, it does take a lot out of us to keep the forklifts moving, find like for example, just this week we had about 50 warehouse loads, right? And majority of those were floor loaded. Just imagine that being. I would not. I don't know if this is a hack or something, but yeah, if you must have a lot of industry experience. In one week you got 50 loads, and one week you only got 5 loads, right? So you got to be able to shift gears really fast and find the labor crew, find forklift capacity, find the drive ends, and a lot of times these customers do need help, move their, just like today, we had like 2 cancellations. Freight was supposed to go in on hot shot trucking, and those guys were like, hey, this load is not going to be safe and secure. So pretty much I would say speed always wins. I mean, that's something Al Davis with the Raiders said, right? So as long as you are able to help your customers with speed, hey, that is talent with experience, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes sense, but yeah.
No, it certainly does. And here's a little piece that maybe we could take out of the pod, but like something that's been on my mind. We have, and Alicia, make note that this next part doesn't need to be in, but we have our warehouse is kind of fully booked out, right?
Yeah.
And this is why my mind is on the how do we get more for the same space because we're fully booked out. And I think, we're in a space where like, let's say our overall warehousing costs per month are like, with labor and everything, maybe like 34, 35 grand. And with a fully booked out warehouse, I think we're able to do like 45 to $47,000, right? Which if you think about it, it's not, is that enough? Is it like making 15 grand enough for the headache of like having a fully booked out warehouse? I don't know. Like that, the verdict is out on that, right? So, like, it's why we need to be thinking way deeper about not just like, okay, let's do this thing or this service, but like, how do we do this thing or this service in a world-class way so that like we could just get more revenue and then more profit from the thing? And so, 25,000 square feet of warehouse, how do we optimize that and get it to a place where we're not, just charging on a per square foot basis, and maybe we could stack a couple in there and now we can make maybe 50 grand on a 32,000, $34,000 investment, right? Which is like, okay, yeah, 16 grand in a month, that's 180
That's a
grand a year.
good month, right? Like A lot of
That's a
times
perfect month.
we,
That's the
we
best
had
month we could have.
last year was pretty slow, man. Last year we lost, I would say we lost money last year, but hey, over, if you look at it, does having a warehousing service add on to your business help? I will say yes, because over the years it has helped us gain more customers. Because again, in the market, if you're not problem solving like we talked about in the past, right? I mean, how many problems are there? How many are you even solving in house? Because we're trying to package 3 to 4 services at least with the customer. The only thing that outsources is like flatbeds. In house, we're able to do box trucks, dry vans, power only, drayage, warehousing, right? And now we're stacking some certifications on top of that as well, right? So again, stay tuned. We'll be adding a lot more services to our operation there, and where our customers can rely on in-house, take care of them. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And then lastly here, the the broker conversation, how the middlemen, the brokers, make modern shipping work. I've been seeing a lot of like crazy. I think there's a some type of law they're trying to get passed about broker transparency and whether or not the broker should have to share the rate that they're getting to the carrier. And I'm honestly not sure where I lie on that. I think there's probably a good reason on both sides why you should or shouldn't do that thing. But I just think it's, to the point, to the like, the subject line here, which is like how they make the modern shipping world work. Being honest, most trucking carriers can't do any marketing. They can't, like, they're so busy operating a trucking business that they don't have the time to do outreach for customers and to do marketing and to have like processes and systems that are like not just in their own operation of like making the business run better, but then like secondarily having marketing and advertising systems that are going to kind of work so that you can have a continuous pipeline of work that you can then do. So I think, as much as people may or may not like them sometimes, and I see like just like real arguments in the Twitter world and the X world about this, but they are filling a need that's there, which is like, hey, the carriers aren't able to do the marketing. They're not doing the outreach to the customers. And the ones who are not doing it at a level that is efficient enough to like fill the need that there is for all of the shippers that just want their problem solved, right? They're just like, hey, bro, I don't want to be in logistics, man. I'd make a product, right? I just want my stuff to get where it's supposed to get on time and in the way that it's supposed to be at a reasonable price, right? So, with that said, I think, they're filling a pretty good need in the market and they've been around. I remember, a buddy of mine who founded a very big brokerage, he talked about how when he started out, there were no brokerages, right? And the brokerage model came along while he was like a younger person in the business. And then that was what he was like, oh, let me ride this model up, right? And he rode that model up, which was a great, ended up being very good for him to the tune of many hundreds of millions of dollars. So, um, I, hey, kudos to the brokers for getting into that space and providing that service and really linking to key links in the supply chain, which is people who have stuff that they need moved, and then the people who do the moving who are not as capable of doing the outreach to customers.
I mean, any industry, right? Trucking, truckers, brokers, shippers. There's always good ones and there's the bad ones. But I wish more companies would be a little bit open minded. I know there's brokers get a lot of hate, but I feel like even as an asset based carrier, which is, over the years we relied heavily on brokers to keep our trucks moving, right? And we have a lot of good relationship with a lot of the good brokers. The bad ones we just won't work with. I mean, a lot of the new players that have rolled into trucking that do not pay any extra charges when any issue arises or something like that. And then and most of the brokers they understand and they adapt and they do a good job in communicating, right? But yeah, I definitely think brokers offer flexibility. I mean, any overflows that we have, like for today, we had overflows. We relied on some of the brokers to help us. move freight from our warehouse. So, I mean, as a shipper as well, I mean, I would say we're a warehouse shipper. I guess, we have a lot of freight that needs to get moved. I mean, that's where brokers come in to kind of offload some of that workload from from our end.
I can't remember where I read it at. I know here in our notes it says that 90% of shippers use brokers or at least some freight, and that sounds directionally correct. I do know that I think the vast majority of shippers are working with kind of and these are probably very large mega carriers, right? And most of the broker work is like overflow stuff that they couldn't get handled by these larger carriers. And then there's the subset of that work then that can't get fulfilled by the brokers that then, or that they can't get contractually from another carrier that then goes like into the load boards and stuff. And so,
Yeah.
there's definitely like value adds, man, that, like if you're a shipper, like, you're going to get capacity access, you're going to kind of mitigate your risk there for having it, right? And then there's the administrative relief, really on both sides for the carrier and for the shipper, right? In terms of like not having to deal with the just immense amount of paperwork back and forth that sometimes, arises in these types of transactions. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I guess as a from our perspective, when would you prefer to work with a broker versus going direct, Tal? And you answer and then I can go as well. As a carrier, when do you choose to work with a broker versus going direct?
I mean, we started working with brokers. We never thought we were going to be able to ever get business any other way, right? I mean, even now we got a good mix of mostly brokers, freight forwarders, custom brokers, and now we got a healthy mix of direct customers that, again, I've, you had it on point that a lot of trucking companies are not able to do any kind of marketing or sales. I mean, that's all it kind of takes for you to put yourself out in front of, direct customers to land a few, right? But yeah, I don't know if that kind of answered the question, but maybe you can add on.
Yeah, I think obviously the brokers are just they're in control of a ton of freight, right?
Yeah.
Which is a good thing because they have the ability and the network capacity to get a lot of that stuff filled. But as a carrier, I think it just comes down to like what, like are you willing to do the work of marketing and of like follow up and lead generation and freaking drip campaigns and funneling campaigns and getting people to click on links and then funneling them down and then spending the many months it takes to turn those customers into customers. Like if you're willing to do that, then like heck yeah, man, you should go and you should kind of work direct. And I think all carriers that can should be doing some of that because you want to, try to diversify. And so we're in the process and we have some good, leads that we're working on right now that are like pretty high value, I would say, and that we should be able to kind of get closed in the next kind of, you know, 180 days or so. And that'll put us in a good position where we have a good mix where we're working with brokers and we're working kind of with shippers directly. I think it really just will always come down to like the amount of work that you're willing to do, like much of life is, right? Like if you're willing to jump into the arena and be a good marketer as well and do good sales outreach and be good at sales, then you won't have any problems. But if not, then you're going to kind of be working with brokers and load boards ultimately. Luckily, we're in a good part of the market where at least most of the brokered freight that we get pays at a good rate, right? Like at the doing the drayage work. It's certainly, and we've seen this in our own operation. The over the road stuff is a lot more problematic with the brokers just because there's just a lot less margin there to be had from all sides. So, but yeah, I think for myself, I choose to be diverse, have some good broker relationships, cultivate good shipper relationships, and that's kind of the path we're taking right now. We may have gotten it done in there, guys.
Thank you for your insight. And for our listeners, remember to subscribe our channel.
Oh yeah, hold on. You gotta give it the proper lead out. So you gotta go, hey guys, this
All right,
is
all right,
shift happens.
all right, all right. Yeah. All right, guys. Tal here. Appreciate you guys listening in. Darian, thank you for your insight. And for our listeners, please remember to subscribe to our channel, Shift Happens, on YouTube, and visit us at gsdrage.com for more information. Until next time, keep the wheels turning, guys. Appreciate you.
Keep the wheels turning, baby. I love that actually. Did you come up with that on the spot? That was sexy, man.
I mean, I took some notes, man.
There we go. I like that.
I gotta have some taglines, man. We gotta keep making our stuff better, man.
I love that. Keep the wheels turning, baby. That's spectacular. Okay,